Welcome back to another week with Let's Discuss with Meg Duke, where we discuss some things perinatal and all things mental health. Today, I am so excited for our guest. Jennifer holds an MA in Counseling, an MACP, and is a certified Canadian Counsellor, a CCC. She is the CEO, the Chief Empathy Officer, and founder of Ask Therapy for Moms. With over 20 years of experience within the fields of maternal health, childbirth, and psychology studies, she uses her expertise and voice to help advance the dialogue on trauma-informed care, maternal mental health, and healing in general. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Meg. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, what a pleasure. So I always like to start off the conversation with people by asking how we know each other, but you and I met through email.
Yeah, correct. And your podcast.
Yeah, that was really, that's right. So what got you into counseling psychology?
Yeah, so that, usually opens up the story, and that can take up our whole time together. So feel free to interrupt at any point if you want to shift gears.
Sure.
Prior to going into counseling psychology, my background was in performance psychology. So before I entered the world of birth, I was an athlete and kind of working my way towards the Olympics, had an injury, and was studying sports psychology. Back then it was called sports psychology. This is in the 90s. Now we call it performance psychology. And at that time, it was very much like the birth of the movement of, brain and mind, and the fact that our mind can differentiate the difference between this external reality and our internal reality. So a lot of focus on peak performance through preparation and visualization. And I got really inspired by that work. And so just to kind of like fast forward through those years, I got pregnant unexpectedly, 22 at the time. And obviously my world took a shift in trajectory. And I never actually completed my master's. I had done my 2 years and I never finished my thesis. And this weighed on me for all these years. And so after the birth of my first son, which really initiated me into my passion of the whole world of birth, which is like, once you have a child, it's like you're initiated into what's behind that curtain. And I honestly didn't know anything about the culture of birth as a 22-year-old, but I did have a strong connection to my body. And I also had a strong belief that my body could perform or peak perform. So I really entered that birth space from that lens, which I think is really important to include in any conversation that I'm having, because I already was primed to set myself up, you might say, for success. And I kind of went into my first birth experience like it was an athletic event, and like I was preparing for the Olympics.
Yes.
And I had an incredible experience with that first birth. And so, like many moms, whether the birth was euphoric or whether the birth was traumatic, something can be initiated where now you just want to shout from the mountaintops and you want everybody to know what's behind that curtain. And, at that time in my life, I really wanted everybody to know how incredible that experience could be. And so that's how I entered the birth culture. There's a lot in between that I can share, and maybe we'll dive into that today.
Yes,
So then on the other side of that, after when I was about 35, so about 11 years ago, I had what I would call my real encounter with my dark night of the soul, in which trauma after trauma was surfacing, and resulted in PTSD diagnosis. And that was the initiation into my healing journey. In that healing journey process, I was, again, very determined to look at mental health through the lens of neurobiology. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of public information available. Now it's everywhere. But even just 11 years ago, we didn't have access to the whole somatic side of healing and recovery and mental health, and how trauma is a biological and spiritual, one could say soulful, injury to our system. And so through my healing journey, which I was very passionate about, I studied relentlessly to understand what was happening to my mind, heart, and body and soul, and how do I heal. And so that journey unfolded. And through that process, I started to really awaken to this world of trauma in childbirth, and how so much of my passion for those years in between when I was in the world of birth was about doing everything that I could to mitigate harm or trauma in birth by supporting moms in a certain way. And so this will answer your question. And so through that process of my own kind of investigation, like as if I was my own guinea pig, trying to really uncover everything that happens when we're recovering from trauma, and realizing that so many moms are suffering in the postpartum as a result of unresolved trauma that's hooked into their body system, their heart system, and their mind system. And so I merged those two worlds because of my background in the birth industry, and quite a eclectic background in the birth industry. I had great insight and understanding of that culture. And then I just merged it with the world of trauma recovery. And that's when I was motivated to complete my master's. That never happened all those years ago. And go back to school once I was well enough to be able to actually hold a sentence together in my mind. I went back to school and completed that master's so that I could really bring these worlds together and be a voice, if possible, of sanity in these very challenging times for so many moms.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's amazing. Okay. I have to ask before we move on, what were you training for the Olympics? What sport?
So my love was always volleyball, but I was always too short. And so the sport that I actually got somewhere with was fastball. And and so it was just before, it was literally the season before fastball went to the Olympics as a trial run. And the coach who coached that was my coach at the university. And that's a whole other story.
I was just like, I'm obsessed with the Olympics. So you mentioned the Olympics. I was like, well, we're going to have to take 60 seconds and just get that information.
Yeah, I was too back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that's so wonderful. Yeah. And I love how you describe that, because I think giving birth is akin to an Olympic event, certainly a physical exploration of what your body is capable of doing, and perhaps even things that you didn't think your body was capable of doing.
Absolutely. And also mentally, right? It requires an enormous amount of mental preparation as well, which not everybody has access to. But I mean, we could go in and explore all of that if you want.
Let's go ahead. Absolutely. Because I like you were talking about performance psychology, peak performance through visualization. And I mean, nothing fully can prepare you for the moment that you give birth. It's experienced so differently by every person, but having that opportunity really to explore and practice, and the mindful side of it, the physical components. You're absolutely correct that we don't all have the same access to those things, and also how useful they can be and helpful in preparation. Absolutely. And so I was wondering, you have talked about polyvagal therapy. I've talked about that and everything. What is that? What is it? Some of our team doesn't probably know. All of them don't know that. What is that? And kind of what is your, what kind
How
of,
do I see it?
How did you discover it? Yeah.
Well, so again, I'm going to back that up a little bit, but, high level answer to your question, what is polyvagal theory? I mean, this was born out of Stephen Porges's work. So for those of you who don't know who he is or his work, you can definitely Google who Stephen Porges is. he comes from a biological background, so a lot of scientific research to understand our nervous system in all of its complexities. And really, from my understanding, he was the first person to kind of coin that term, your polyvagal system, as a wandering nerve that's part of our nervous system that interacts with everything from our digestion to our lungs to our heart, right? And it's part of our survival system, and it's part of what I call our thriving system. So I can talk a bit about that too. So kind of off of the research of Stephen Porges, there's Deb Dana, who really marked it in the world of therapy. And so she took Porges's concepts, and then she kind of created a therapeutic approach to be able to apply some of his principles. And so before that stuff really emerged into the public eye, I, as I said before, I was really studying a lot about neurobiology and trauma and what happens to our nervous system, what happens to our biological system when it's trapped in a state of trauma, or there's trapped traumatic material there, and what do we need to do with that? And that really goes back to a lot of Peter Levine's work, right, where he really spoke a lot. He was the one who brought forward this idea that as a mammal, we need to complete that stress response. And so from a body point of view, that the idea is, how do we take that stressful material, and that material is your emotions, it's the actual stress hormones, right? It's also the associations, it's also the thoughts, right? All of that material is in your embodied system, and it can get trapped there where it never gets to complete that stress response. And so the idea being that in a supportive environment, one where you feel anchored, one where you feel co-regulated, you can help to actually complete that process by moving that material. I say metabolizing it or digesting it or discharging it, by moving that material through and out of that body system will actually help to complete that survival stress response, so that you're no longer revved up in that trapped state. So that's the body focused aspect of it. So that information was already coming through Dan Siegel's work, through some of Gabor Mate's work, through Peter Levine, obviously through Van der Kolk, right? The Body Keeps the Score. So there was like quite a few people out there who were speaking about this. And then Porges's material came into the mix as well. The polyvagal material came into the mix as well. And I'm giving you a long-winded answer to your question.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I actually know a lot of this information, and I am still listening to you. I'm on the edge of my seat. Go ahead.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, because taking this material and as a practitioner, right? Like taking this material and embodying it and making sense out of it, like that's a journey in and of it to itself, right? So taking the polyvagal material that was very sciencey, yes, the social engagement system, yes, the system needs to feel safe and secure, like all this stuff that really aligns with the attachment theory. But how do I apply it? And, so that's when Deb Dana came into the frame of focus, where, now there was this application of how we can work with somebody's system and help them map their nervous system so that they can start to feel in connection to, or as it said, to befriend your embodied experience. And so that kind of really brought it together. And that's why I say we're a nervous system informed approach, as a clinic, but me personally, because we go in through the body first. And by going in through the body first, we're kind of getting a break from the story. Right? The story is usually what brings us into therapy. But when we approach it through the body, we can kind of like rest the story in the background and just work to start to attune our attention to that felt experience that many of us resist feeling because we've never been shown what to do with it. We've never been shown how to make sense out of it. Did that answer your question?
It did, and so beautifully, yes. Because, like I said, a lot of people on the team that are listening, they're not familiar, they don't know. Some, assume a lot of people listening have probably heard of, the body keeps the score, or whatever.
Right.
But it's so beautiful to hear it in that way, because you're absolutely right. Like, we resist feeling because we don't know how to deal with it, and so we tell ourselves to, suck it up, get over it. My two favorite expressions as a therapist. Kidding. But so, yeah, and I think that is very helpful too, and the way you described resting the story for a little bit, because I think it can feel difficult while, narrative therapy is very important, and it's very helpful for people to get their story out and to feel heard. Sometimes it can be helpful to have a different way of focusing on it than just continuing on the same tack.
Absolutely. And so what I've noticed is that, this idea of the body keeping the score, I would say that our system keeps the score.
Yes.
And our system, in my world, our system includes the embodied experience. So this physical body, I call it your biology, but it also includes this cognitive system, your mental load, right? The story. It also includes the emotional system, your heart center, right? And then for those who are comfortable, we can go out into the expanded, and we can talk about the soul system or the spiritual system or the expanded state of consciousness system, right? And of course, that entire system is in relationship to its environment at all times, right? We're this dynamic being.
Yes.
That is, biological and energetic. And we've got this nervous system that really anchors us into this biological experience that we're having here on Earth. And what I say 3D reality is here, and the nervous system is like a conduit. It's like an antenna, and it's just picking up all this information and sorting it out at like speed of light. We can't even catch up to it. And then our system responds: safe, unsafe, right? Welcome, warning,
right?
Alarm, calm, right? And then we're like, whoa, what do I do with that? Must be bad. And then we separate ourselves from it. So let me just bring in context of, a lived experience as a mom, for example. What really got me passionate about all of this was recognizing how much our nervous system is not supported within the birth culture.
Yes.
So a lot of what we're experiencing in labor and delivery, for example, and even prenatally, right, can set the tone, is that there are a lot of, let's say, procedures, protocols, interventions that unfold that very much are not in support of what the nervous system needs for a sense of security and safety. And so a mom's nervous system can be in an activated survival stress state and have an experience that they have, whether they deem that as being traumatic or not traumatic, their body has already encoded it as so.
Right.
Because they never received the necessary anchoring support or relief that one might have needed to be able to shift states in the middle of it.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go deep into that, but that's an overview of like what I'm very passionate about. And if I were to ever go on to do a PhD, it would be to actually bring awareness to how are we going to support not just the physical safety of a mom, but the neurobiological safety for that mom, so that in the postpartum, they're not picking up all of those pieces and struggling with unresolved trauma and left alone to do it.
Well, and of course, here in the States, I mean, we have one follow-up for the mother, the birthing person, 6 weeks after the baby comes, and then we're sent off on our way. And of course, again, we talked about access earlier. Some of us have more access to other opportunities to take care of certain things, and some of us don't. And it's interesting. I hear a lot of people talking about kind of like anger or just big emotions in general. Being a parent, of course, obviously sleep deprivation and many other things contribute to that. But yeah, we talk about in some of the things that were traumatic in the birthing process or in the pregnancy. And I think I talk about trauma Olympics outside of people who are training for the Olympics, but now I feel like I'm being cliche because we were talking about the Trauma Olympics of like, well, mine wasn't as bad as my friends over here, so that's not true. That, I can't say that was traumatic, or even if it's not in a comparison, it's just generally of like, well, I don't know, that wasn't traumatic. And we recognize when we kind of come back through and look at things that, hey, I haven't processed that, and it's coming out because my body, my neurobiological system is still hanging on to it. It's coming out in, maladaptive ways.
Correct. That we label.
Right.
That we put in a box based on an assessment. Right. And then we give it a name. And then that name is either postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety or postpartum psychosis. And then we're siloed. Right. So in that, we're no longer connected to the larger story. Now we're in the story of postpartum depression or the story of postpartum anxiety without larger context. And, almost every mom I've ever talked to, especially prenatally, they come in with, I just want to do everything I need to do to make sure I don't get that thing. Right. So there's a lot of fear about, well, what if I'm, haunted by that monster around the corner, that we call a postpartum mood disorder. So the awareness of postpartum in general, I think it is good that we have been bringing a lot of awareness to the forefront to say, hey, this matters. We need to start paying attention to the mom's experience in the postpartum and how you make sure they're not in isolation, and how can we support more, and what is this time, like, I think it's healthy that that's coming to the forefront, but it's also ringing a lot of alarm bells preemptively, where it's like that thing that happens, it's going to consume me.
Yes.
And so I do have a lot of conversations about that. And by providing context, which in polyvagal theory is foundational to the health and wellness of your nervous system, is what they call the 3 C's, which is context, choice, and connection. And so with context, meaning information helps to actually turn down the volume on confusion. And then the person can start to feel like they understand maybe what's happening and therefore make informed choice. And so, so we're just supporting the nervous system ahead of time to say, let's look at the bigger picture here. And let's also look at the fact that this is not a sentence. There's things that we can do to support you.
That is such an interesting thing. I'm having some conversations with clients pop into my head as you're explaining some of these things about the fear that we have, any health anxiety that you might have had anyway, compounded by the idea of carrying a fetus in your uterus and then giving birth and all of that, and trying to control what we can control, which is
exactly
hilarious, right? What can we control? Not much, especially parenting, but also, where is the balance between seeking control and feeling set up for success? And that's something that I think it's individual. Of course, it's unique to each person, and also making sure that we're recognizing that we're not seeking perfection in some way, seeking to control. Yeah, for sure. I like that idea too. You're talking about like decreasing the confusion and being able to make informed choice. Yeah.
And when we are seeking control, that indicates like, oh, my protector's on board, right? My nervous system is revved up. Something about whatever I'm neuroreceiving, right? Like I'm taking in information that there is potential threat. And so like paying attention to that, and then supporting the nervous system in a way in which it's like, okay, so, what do you need to feel even more safe and supported along the way, right? So that along the way, ideally, you can access those 3 C's throughout. So typically what happens is when those are removed, then we have the potential for trauma to set in, right? Lack of context, lack of choice, lack of connection. That's overwhelming to the nervous system.
For sure. For sure. And I wanted to chat a little bit because I know that you are a certified holistic doula, and that you've also worked in midwifery as well for a better part of a decade, right?
Yeah, so I like to clarify that. So in the world of midwifery, there's a lot of politics. And so I entered through what was known as direct entry midwifery,
Uh-huh.
which in the States you might understand because it's a state term, really,
Okay.
like an American term.
Mm-hmm.
So direct entry means very like self-studied apprenticeship model.
Sure.
You kind of have your teacher. So I did work with my teacher slash elder for a long period of time,
Hmm.
which resulted in a couple apprenticeships, hands-on apprenticeships, one in Mexico, one in El Paso. I
Wow.
was trained in a very alternative paradigm, so very much on the edge. So as far to the edge as you could imagine
Yes.
was the paradigm I was trained in, which didn't really fit into the more professionalized system, especially as midwifery was starting to emerge as a professional body
Mm-hmm.
and seen within the medical sector as a professional body.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, being trained in that very, very far out there radical way didn't really fit into that paradigm,
Yeah.
which I wrestled with very much for many, many years,
Sure.
and wanted to find a way to make it fit. Long story short, that just didn't work out. So yes, I've worked in that world. I've worked as a holistic doula. I've supported moms in every potential birthing experience you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked with moms on the free birth side of things, and I've worked with moms on the elective cesarean side of things, and everything in
Everything in
between.
between.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's a vast kind of I can see in different worlds, you could say, and understand sort of what's going on within the different paradigms of birth
Mm-hmm.
and birth care.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Somewhat tangentially, just in terms of like, wouldn't it be nice if I could? I've always kind of been interested in the idea of like, I wish that I could follow somebody around and do a
Mm.
lot of the different tasks so that I could be even more informed. I've had my own two children, but that's a very specific example of I'd love to be more, have those opportunities to see more of the things that go on, and midwifery and doula and nurses that work in obstetrics and all of the
Mhm.
different things that are involved, because I think it obviously just continues to help inform practice and be able to continue to understand more of those things.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I'm really passionate about, and kind of what we're moving towards within our clinic is to work with other perinatal therapists who want to be childbirth informed as well.
Mm-hmm.
And because there is something I know from my clients, they've told me that knowing that I have such a deep kind of history and understanding of the culture of birth
Mm-hmm.
is very supportive to like a felt sense of security in the relationship, and in so much that when you come at it, let's just say, can I riff on this for a minute?
Please, please, please,
Okay.
please. I am on the edge of my seat metaphorically. I want to hear all of it.
Well, to be childbirth informed would mean to understand the politics of birth, to
Mm,
understand the politics of midwifery, to
mm,
understand that there are different paradigms, and
mm.
not every mom fits in that one paradigm. So we've
Yes.
got, a more, let's say the dominant paradigm is more of the hospital birth, medical supported birthing experience, right? And then we have a professional midwifery, home birth kind of culture, and then we also have the free birth, traditional birth attendant culture. We have a lot of different paradigms, and I think it's really important to understand how each of those kind of emerged, to understand the history and the culture of way back when, you
Mm-hmm.
know, the culture of birth, which some argue midwifery was the oldest profession before prostitution,
Mm.
right? And so there's that argument, prostitution being the oldest profession. I'm sure I'm not saying this derogatory at all.
Right.
But so this is like this is going way back in terms of like, here we are as a species, as a mammal that brings forth life onto this planet. We create, we hold, we birth, right? Like this is the birth of humanity.
Right.
And so understanding what can happen within those paradigms and how that might impact a mom's experience of birth is really important.
Yes.
So if we only have a siloed experience based on our own personal birthing experiences, let's say as a therapist, then we're seeing through that lens. That's a bias, right? As much as we want to pretend like we're not, we are. And my bias would be seeing through this very radical lens, right? So I had to work very hard to kind of basically unravel all of those different biases that I had to be able to really walk alongside somebody's experience in the postpartum, regardless of what paradigm they landed in, right? Understanding that is really helpful as well to work with, let's say, a mom who hired a midwife and was having an attempted home birth, and they had a transfer of care. That loss of dream birth, that is a different kind of experience than a mom who chose to be in the hospital, trusted in their medical care providers, was happy with the care of their obstetrical team, and had an experience that left them either feeling deeply disappointed or traumatized. Those are two very different worlds. And so the mom over here who wanted to have a home birth was very attached to that and ended up with an unplanned, unexpected emergency cesarean section, for example. She's grieving multiple losses, or they're grieving multiple losses.
Sure.
Right. And if we don't understand what that might be like, then they feel like there's a piece lacking there. It's like you're not getting it, right? Because that's where at least your baby's healthy, right? That's where that comes from. Like, at least you're here and your baby's healthy. And it's like, that's empty. We know that. Now
I genuinely do not like the words "at least."
I know.
Deeply.
Yeah, there you go. 100%. And I would never say that, but of course, moms hear this all the time.
They sure do. They sure do.
So then let's just wrap this up. You take it one step further and you're working with a mom who was in the free birth culture, and they were choosing to birth unassisted with no medical professional there, or they chose to have a circle of birth support that came from that culture.
Sure.
And then they are in the hospital having a cesarean section. Now, this is a huge leap, right? We're going through paradigms. So we're actually breaking down belief systems, and that's very challenging to one's beingness, right? Yes. So if we don't understand those cultures, or if we have a judgment about, whoa, over here, free birther, oh, that hospital safest, if we have any of those as a practitioner who's supporting the perinatal population, then we're actually doing a disservice.
Truly. Yes. Well, I mean, I end every episode with be curious, not judgmental. And that also deeply guides my practice of, unless I'm a mandated reporter in several states where I'm licensed, but otherwise, unless there's an actual concern for somebody's health and safety, tell me more, let me know about it. And I think that you're right. People have such strong preconceived notions about how a birth should go and what is needed and required, that you're right. If you're speaking with people who have very strong opinions that are differing from your plan, and that's not the message that you're hoping for. And then certainly, again, to go from wanting to have a fully unassisted birth to a surgical procedure that's the spectrum right there.
Absolutely. And then you're isolated in that. You don't feel seen, you don't feel soothed, you don't feel safe, you don't feel supported, right? Which we all know is necessary for secure attachment and for our own healing journey. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk about, because you wrote Healing After Birth and Midwifery for the Soul. Amazing. I always like to ask people, and one day I'd like to write some books. So I'm always curious, like, what was the writing process like for you?
Yeah, sure. So remember I said I kind of hit my healing crisis about 11 years ago. And I joke with some of my friends that like I literally shit out creativity. So during my healing journey, I never considered myself to be creative. I never finished my first master's because I had severe writer's block. I couldn't write.
Yes.
I couldn't write. And then all of a sudden, through my own journey, I was moved. I could not do anything but write. And so, and also I created jewelry in that time. It was just like my whole system was, being taken over by this creative spirit, wow. And it was beautiful. But we know when we are healing, we release so much that we create room for our creative being, which we all have, which, is at the core of who we are, is creative. Right. And so it was shocking for me to realize that that's true. I never imagined it to be true. And so that's how that process happened. It actually was very fluid. It was very creative. It was very inspired. There was I didn't create timelines. I didn't sit down every day at a certain time to create a chapter. I didn't even outline it.
Wow.
Everything I've written was just right.
Yes.
And that's what happened. And yeah, 2 books came out of that process, which seems a little extreme. Like 2018 was the first one. And then the second one was published on the winter solstice, which is December 21st, 2019. And so just before 2020, and something in me was like, it has to go out on 2019. Don't ask me why. When I really birth these things into the population, into beingness, it's a very frightening experience to my nervous system.
Oh, sure.
Because it's very vulnerable.
Yes.
And I didn't filter. And then I kind of go through that vulnerability hangover. The problem with having a book out there is the hangover never ends.
Yes. Yes.
So it's like, oh, that's still out there. Right. And it's like, oh yeah. And then I'll notice, sometimes when I'm feeling extra vulnerable, I want to like take it off the shelves or something like that. But it's helpful when I do get affirmation from people, how much the books have supported them.
Yes.
But yeah, that's my writing process.
Yeah. Oh, that's so amazing to hear about. And yeah, the vulnerability hangover for sure. When you put something in the universe that people can consume again and again, and new people can continue to find, it's tough. It's kind of tough to sit with that discomfort. And I'm glad to hear that you're getting such good feedback that's helping you not pull it from the shelves.
Yeah, and maybe only people give me good feedback, but I'm sure everybody has all kinds of experiences. And that's the other thing. You can't control that, right? It's completely out there for public scrutiny.
Yes, that's absolutely right. With the way, I don't want to be negative, but with the way keyboard warriors are these days, I think, if people had a lot of bad stuff to say, somebody might, they might be saying it, but it sounds like it's hopefully all the good stuff. And yeah. So what were some of your bigger takeaways when you were doing the research for this books? When I guess maybe you were talking about that through the creativity, it wasn't even so much research. It was just, you were just pulling through the research of your brain. Like it was already in the catalog and it was just coming out.
Yeah. Yes, true. And also, the healing after birth was what I was trying to do with that book is take the program that I had developed and I had piloted and worked with groups of moms with, and had put together, like a real trauma-informed step-by-step journey for these moms. I wanted to put that into book form so that it was more accessible, bringing in a lot of the activities, really explaining it, bringing in some of the pieces that were part of that group program. And so then I just pulled all of that together. And that was sort of the brain behind launching that book, was really so that it was accessible. And this was, you have to remember, this was before, when I was pulling all that together, it was before we even were publicly talking about birth trauma. Not very long ago.
Right.
Now it seems to be popcorning all over the place.
Yes.
But yeah, so that, yeah, the research was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you're right. It is interesting to think about, and it's difficult for me to know as well, because I was not focused in perinatal. I didn't have children. I had my first child born in 2019. So I don't remember people talking a lot about that. And I wonder, is it, confirmation bias of like, well, I'm talking about it all the time, so I see it, or is it, it is, it's that it's not that long ago that we weren't really validating. We weren't discussing. There was stigma. There was the at least of it all. And so it's really been nice to see people feeling more able to take up that space and sit in our own power of being a parent and recognizing the trauma and recognizing the experience and doing something for ourselves to help along that journey. Whereas before it was kind of, keep your head down and push ahead.
Yeah, and I would say that's still out there.
Certainly is. Certainly is. Our jobs are
Yeah.
uphill sometimes indeed, but
yeah, but there is more awareness for sure. And of course, social media is a huge proponent of that.
Absolutely. So I know it's kind of tough because you have such a broad experience, but kind of what are some common themes that you've recognized in your work? Some things that are some of the bigger takeaways or some of the things that you're noticing kind of popping up more?
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely the piece of mom struggling in the postpartum and really looking for or wanting, tools to overcome their struggles and not linking it to anything perinatal. So not linking what they're struggling with perhaps historical content that would have maybe sent their system into a state of alarm. And so walking them through that timeline of looking at all the additional stressors that maybe were disregarded, right? Then we were able to, then the mom sort of relaxing into, oh, this is not just something in this moment, but actually we get to look at this through a bigger lens and then work towards, restoring the nervous system, the heart system, and the mind system. So there's that piece, the lack of kind of linking the struggle with the larger story.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then there is this other theme that always shows up, which is the internalization of I failed, my body failed, I did something wrong, it's my fault, I'm bad, or I'm a bad mom, or I'll forever be broken. So from how people are internalizing, the theme is often the same. And so I'll always say to a mom, like when we look at how they're internalizing, so I'll say, you've got this experience, it's held in your body, but then the mind made up a story about it. And the mind makes up this story based on our past experiences. And we can only change that story when we become conscious of it in present.
Right.
And so I'll remind the mom that we're going to first work with the body, we're going to work with the somatics, and then we're going to work with the cognition. So the story you're telling yourself, or the story that got anchored into that. In other words, the I am belief.
Yes.
That's at the core of it. Because that I am belief is what's causing the chronic dysregulation, making it even harder for the system to restore itself. The system wants to move towards homeostasis.
Right.
It has an intelligence. But then when we get hooked on to this story as the broken record, then it's really hard for our nervous system to know it's safe enough to move towards wellness and homeostasis. So we work, I say we're going to excavate that. We're going to bring it to the surface. We're going to look at that monster so that it's no longer, in the shadows. It's no longer a monster under the bed. So when we do that, it's a shared story. And then I'll say, because it's a shared story, you're not alone with it. And most likely it's not yours. It's not unique to you. And it's a lie. These are the lies that we've been told over and over and over again. These are the lies that we tell ourselves. And these lies keep us in this place of disempowerment. So we work towards turning that around, but that can only be done on an embodied sense. Like it's not a mental thing. So
yes,
it's a felt thing.
absolutely. I love that. I love it just struck to me too. I've talked a lot about it, that words matter, right? And so when people talk about the I am belief, and internalizing things, I've done something wrong, I am bad, whatever it might be, like the word miscarriage for me is a sticking point that I don't use. And I do believe in supporting people in, like, for example, I'm also a licensed chemical dependency counselor, and some people find a lot of energy and strength in referring to themselves as an addict, and some people don't. And so I will meet you where you are on that. I'm not going to ever be like, you are an addict to somebody, but I will meet them. But, miscarriage means I miscarried something. I mean, it's literally the word. And I really think it just puts so much, a pregnancy loss or a pregnancy crisis is not often, rarely the fault of the person carrying the child, the baby. And so it's so hard for people sometimes to kind of divorce themselves from that. Like I have, my body is a mistake. I've done something wrong. And so just making sure that we're recognizing and finding more empowering language can be very helpful in those situations as well.
That's really beautiful. I love that you named that, not using that word miscarriage just because of exactly what it means, and that it has a blaming connotation to it. Yeah. I hear you. I'm with you. And I think that we have been conditioned for generations, culturally, at least within this dominant culture, we have been conditioned to either look outside oneself to place blame. Right? So the whole litigation system, especially in America, it's a high litigation country.
Yes.
Right. So I'm going to fuel all of this unresolved stuff externally by locating, someone to place the blame on, right, then I internalize needing to find something and someone to blame, right? So we live in a blame culture. And I did write about that actually in my book. I have a whole chapter on shame and blame, because part of our healing is eventually stepping outside of that story too.
Yes.
Which is the place of deep acceptance, right? Acceptance, understanding. Like, so the blame is part of our need to seek to understand.
Right.
Right. And to gather information. But it just kind of got contorted along the way. And then it fuels something. So if we don't have an external to blame, then we have to blame the body. At least that's what the mind does, right?
Right.
So where I'll either hear my body failed me, or my stress, or what I was thinking, all that, right? That's what happened. So it's work to move out, to step out of that.
It is. It's amazing, the systems in which we participate unknowingly, because we were born into them, and so were all of the people before us who introduced us to them as well. And it's really been an interesting period, especially since quarantine, or I don't know if, again, maybe being a parent for me or whatever, feeling deeper in my journey as a mental health professional, but being able to say, like, what are the systems that I'm participating in that are causing harm, certainly to myself, to my children? Like, what are the things that I can stop doing so that my children don't see me doing those? So that I can stop that cycle. And there are a lot of them. I just was reading, I'm going to say it wrong. My Body's Not an Apology. The Body's Not an Apology.
I do. I have that book. Yeah.
Yes. And
purple cover.
Yeah. Sonia Renee Taylor. And that was when I was like, oh my God. Like we think about the things that we were told growing up. And of course I went to college in the Victoria's Secret Angels era. So that was very much, that lives rent free in my brain. So just anyway, I went off a little bit of a tangent. I apologize, but yeah, I think it's really interesting that we're able to sit back and like, why am I talking to myself this way? Why am I allowing myself to participate in this? And is it something that's going to in some way be fruitful for me? Or is it a system that I can choose to no longer, with practice, obviously.
Right. We can't bypass it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
it's not as easy as saying, I'm not doing this anymore, but.
Correct. Yeah. It's like we do have to excavate it from our embodied experience, right? We have to see the impact that it's having on us when we believe that thought. And then we have to understand it is a lie. It's not helpful. It's not supportive, because our truest nature is seeking to be supportive and kind. Like it's compassionately kind, right? This true. And so these internal, and I struggle with it. It's a regular work, right?
Sure.
We, so we're constantly excavating this stuff that has been infiltrated into our system, and we don't even know it. It's the water we swim in.
Yes. I like the way you said. I love excavating. I wrote that down. Excavating. I love that. It's the water we swim in. You're absolutely right. Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough. It's been such a pleasure to get to chat with you. And I wanted to ask you before I let you leave, if you could let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. I always kind of stumble at this part, but if you're in Canada,
right?
Yeah, I know, not good at it. If you're in Canada, you can reach us at therapyformoms.ca. So we serve moms across Canada, kind of Ontario West, but that's, another story. Anyway, so yeah, we work virtually with moms across Canada at therapyformoms.ca. If you're a practitioner, we're going to be launching in March. We're launching what's called Ask Alliance. And this is going to be kind of like a portal for all different practitioners in the field of perinatal health. So whether you're a therapist all the way to physiotherapist, to chiropractor, to midwifery, whatever, birth worker. So the idea there is to start to build a hub of connection and conversation and not be siloed in our profession, and really bring that childbirth informed lens and the trauma-informed polyvagal lens into the conversation with a multidisciplinary group of people. So that will be available in March. If I also work as a coach for Americans, or anybody in the world. So that's a whole other conversation, but you can learn more about that at flowingfears.com. And I think that's it. Most of that stuff can be found online. So
yes, and of course the books as well. They're out there. So
yeah, they're out there.
Vulnerability Hangover Note.
Well, yeah, I'm the worst book promoter ever.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you taking the time. And that's actually, I'm glad that you clarified that, because I actually, if I may do my own little self-promotion, I was really surprised to see how many countries people listen to this show. And it's not just Canada and the United States, but people are, I have right here, there are people in Peru and South Africa, Norway, Austria. I'm like, well, hey.
Well, hello.
Oh, exactly. That's wonderful. So I really appreciate you so much. What a great conversation. So glad we were able to connect. And for the rest of the team out there, be curious, not judgmental.